We are holding on Daf Zayin Amud Aleph on page 7a, and we've been learning an interesting Gemara about the fact that there are certain mitzvahs that don't have any measure, any amount given for them. Meaning, we know many mitzvahs do have a specific measurement for them, but there are mitzvahs that the Torah doesn't clarify what any measure. And the Mishnah in Peah goes through them, and it mentions that Elu Dvarim She'ein Lahem Shiur, these are the things that don't have a measure. And it mentions we have Peah, which are the corner of the field, the Bikurim, Re'oyoin, Gemilas Chasadim, Talmud Torah. So we spoke yesterday about the fact that Peah, the Torah doesn't clearly say if there's a measure for. So it just says leave the corner of the fields for the poor. But the rabbis did give it a measure. So what comes out is that biblically you fulfilled your mitzvah if you gave a small amount of Peah. At least biblically you fulfilled your mitzvah. But rabbinically you really have to give a measure of 1/60th. And the thing is that biblically, let's say you gave very little, you fulfilled your mitzvah. Let's say you give a lot, you're getting a mitzvah for every part and parcel of what you're giving. You're getting a mitzvah. If you gave more, you get a bigger mitzvah. You get more mitzvah. And this is the meaning of ein loy shiur. It doesn't have a measure, meaning if you gave less, you fulfilled the mitzvah. If you give a little amount, if you do a lot, you get another mitzvah for the more you give. It's all part of the mitzvah. It's all adding to the mitzvah. It's a continuation of the mitzvah. And the same thing would apply to Bikurim. Bikurim was the first fruits, but it doesn't say how many of the first fruits. Do you give one date or do you give 20 dates? So Bikurim, and we mentioned yesterday, was there seems to be sources that maybe there is no measure even rabbinically. But then there is an opinion that says based on the Jerusalem Talmud, and I believe the Rambam brings it, that there is a measure rabbinically as well for Bikurim. So Bikurim seems to be a question. It's a little unclear if Bikurim has a rabbinic measure for it. But biblically, it doesn't, which means if you give a little, you fulfilled the mitzvah. If you do a lot, each thing that you gave, that you bring to the Beis Hamikdash and give it to the Kohen, you're fulfilling a mitzvah for the more you add on. So that means that there's no measure minimum and there's no measure maximum. The more you give, the more mitzvah you get. The less you give, the less mitzvah you get. Then the Gemara mentioned the Re'oyoin. Now, Re'oyoin, we know, is referring to going to the Beis Hamikdash and bringing the sacrifice, because it's from the word Re'iyah. And we know Oilas Re'iyah, the burnt offering of seeing, of being seen and seeing Hashem, and going up to the Beis Hamikdash to be seen and see Hashem. So the word Re'oyoin has something to do with that. The Gemara is going to say, initially, it says Re'oyoin is obviously referring to the sacrifice. And then the Gemara asks, what is Re'oyoin? And it basically says that it's either going to the Beis Hamikdash or bringing a korban, going and bringing a korban. So how do you reconcile the Gemara? The Gemara initially tells us that Re'oyoin is referring to the sacrifice. And then the Gemara says, what is Re'oyoin? And it jumps and says it's talking about going to the Beis Hamikdash. Now, it's not really something new, because we dealt with this as well. When we started the tractate, we had the same issue. When it says Hakol Chayavin B'Re'iyah, everyone's Chayav in Re'iyah, even there we had like a debate how to translate it, how to learn. We had a Rashi, a Teves, right? There were different ways of understanding it. Is it the going to the Beis Hamikdash, or is it talking about the sacrifice, bringing the oilas re'iyah? So there are we have sort of a contradiction over here. So the way I explained it yesterday was one of the ways that they explain in the way that they understand Rashi. In other words, there are commentators talk about this, and I explained it based on them, that the way they're learning it. That is that it really means both. And if it would have said Re'iyah, we would have been satisfied that it meant the sacrifice. But because it says Re'ayin, we're actually going to add in that it also means going up to the Beis Hamikdash to be Oila Regel, the actual going up, the travel, going there and showing one's face in the courtyard of the Beis Hamikdash. That is the meaning of Re'ayin. Now, what does it mean that there's no measure for Re'ayin? So and of course that's why the Gemara is bringing this. It brought this Mishnah from Peah. Peah is the tractate that talks about the corners of the field that are given to the poor. That's what that tractate talks about. And in that tractate, so it mentions these mitzvahs that don't have any measure. And one of them is Re'ayin. So what would that mean, that Re'ayin has no measure? So the initial understanding of our Gemara was that it meant the sacrifice. Now, what would that mean if we're talking about a sacrifice? And the sacrifice has no measure. So the understanding of the Gemara is that it has no measure financially. If you buy a cheap sacrifice, you fulfill the mitzvah. You buy a big, nice, full of meat, nice, meaty sacrifice, heavy. You did the mitzvah, even bigger, big mitzvah. You got more of a mitzvah there. But there's no measure, because you fulfill it with a little and you fulfill more with a lot. The more you do, the more you can do more. So that's what the Gemara understands initially with Re'ayin. And the Gemara is a little bothered with that, because our Mishnah did say that you can't just give a cheap burnt offering Re'iyah. Our Mishnah said it has to be a certain value. There is a minimum value. So if we translate Re'iyah meaning the sacrifice, and that's what it seems the Gemara understands initially to be, or I should say automatically, that it means the sacrifice. So if that's so, how do you reconcile the Mishnah, where the Mishnah said there is a minimum value, and the Mishnah in Peah says that there is no minimum or maximum, no shear, no measure for it. So the way our Gemara said was, Rabbi Yochanan said, what it seems like is that we're going to have to translate, when it says there's no measure, we're going to translate there's no maximum amount. But there is a minimum. A minimum there is, and that's our Mishnah. So that was Rabbi Yochanan's initial thought. In order to reconcile our Mishnah with the Mishnah in Peah, you have to say that basically there is no maximum value for the sacrifice, the burnt offering for the holidays. And but there is a minimum amount, and that's our Mishnah. Either Beis Shammai or Beis Hillel, depends on which opinion you follow. You'll have his view of how much the minimum is, but there is a minimum view. Then the Gemara says, no, Rabbi Shaya Berebi, he came and taught that it's no maximum and no minimum. Really? What about our Mishnah? Our Mishnah says there is a minimum. Aval Amru Chachamim, but the rabbi said, or Chachamim Maimrim, but the rabbi said that there is a minimum. So in other words, biblically, the way the Gemara concludes basically sheds light on our Mishnah, that our Mishnah did not mean biblically it has a minimum value. Our Mishnah only meant that rabbinically it has a it has a minimum value. Now, this is the first part of the Gemara explaining Ra'ayoin. Then the Gemara jumps and says, well, what is Ra'ayoin? And then the Gemara says that Ra'ayoin is, Rabbi Yochanan says, showing your face. So that seems to contradict what we just said, that Rabbi Yochanan said that Ra'ayoin was the korban. It's the sacrifice. We just had a previous. So on that, the way we explained it yesterday is that Ra'ayoin, because it uses the term Ra'ayoin, it's adding another meaning as well. That Ra'ayoin means both. It means the sacrifice, and now comes, it's also showing your face. Now, Rabbi Yochanan says it means showing your face. Reish Lakish says it means showing your face with a sacrifice. So now we got to now understand. The Mishnah says there's no measure for Ra'ayoin. In Ra'ayoin, now we just explained means showing your face. So what does this mean to us, that there's no measure when it comes to showing your face? So the understanding is that you can come as often as you want to the Beis Hamikdash, to the courtyard. You're allowed to come. You want to come 5 times? 5 times. 20 times? Whatever you want, you can come. You want to come once during the holiday? You fulfilled the mitzvah. You came once. You came the first day. You fulfilled the mitzvah. Wonderful. You came every day once? Great. You came 10 times each day? Even better. So there's no minimum and there's no maximum. If you do less, you fulfill the mitzvah. You do more, you get more, it's more is added to your mitzvahs, but it's not an obligation, so to speak. You're not obligated to, you fulfilled a mitzvah. So it works both ways. Ra'ayoin, the sacrifice is no minimum and no maximum, at least biblically, but rabbinically there is a minimum of how much the sacrifice has to cost. But maximum, there is none biblically or rabbinically. You could spend as much as you want. And now the other meaning of Ra'ayoin, going to the Beis Hamikdash, showing your face, there's no minimum and there's no maximum. At least you come once. You got to just come once. There's nothing, it's a mitzvah that you could fulfill the simplest way, and then you could fill it as much as you want. So there's no real measure for it. And Reish Lakish says that, yeah, you could come as often as you want, but he adds one qualification. You got to bring a sacrifice whenever you come. Because if you come without a sacrifice, you are transgressing a law. Do not see my face empty-handed. Don't see my face empty-handed. So that's Reish Lakish's view. Rabbi Yochanan argues on that. He says, no, you brought your sacrifice. You did your mitzvah of not coming empty-handed. You're fine. Reish Lakish says, no, you got to come. Every time you come, don't come empty-handed. That's the way Reish Lakish understands the obligation of coming in. There's no limit. You can come as often as you want. Just make sure to bring the sacrifice, that burnt offering. Keep bringing it. Now, the Gemara then said that Rabbi Yochanan really agrees with Reish Lakish the first time you come, that you got to bring the sacrifice. He doesn't use it the first day. His term is be'ikar haregel, which is an interesting term. In the main part of the holiday, ikar haregel, the main part of the holiday. Now, it could be the reason why the Gemara doesn't use the term Yom Tov Rishon, the first day of the holiday, is because what happens if a person didn't bring it on the first day? You would still come to the Beis Hamikdash, the courtyard of the Beis Hamikdash, and you would bring a sacrifice according to Rabbi Yochanan also, of course, according to Reish Lakish, but even according to Rabbi Yochanan, you would come on a different day of the holiday, and you would need to bring a sacrifice. Don't see my face empty-handed. So you didn't come the first day. The other day that you come, you'd also need to do it. So therefore, it doesn't say, maybe that's why it doesn't say Yom Tov Rishon. It just says Ikar Haregel, which would mean like the first time you show up. The main celebration, or the main time, the Ikar of the holiday. I don't know. I mean, literally, it would seem like it means the first day. The Ikar would seemingly mean the first day, but and the truth of the matter is, Rashi does seem to say that. The Rambam mentions that see, Rashi says Be'ikar regel b'yom tov rishon, which sort of fits the words, the main part of the holiday. But the Rambam does say that that this would apply if you came a different day as well. You would need to bring a sacrifice with you, according to Rabbi Yochanan. On that other day that you come, you bring the sacrifice. Do not come empty-handed. Now, Reish Lakish holds that always. You have to always bring it. You know what it's like if you have a guest staying in your house. So they're going to bring a gift for Shabbos, maybe. But if they're staying a few days, are they going to be bringing you a gift every single time they pop in? I don't know. Probably not. They're going to give you one gift. They'll bring a bottle of wine for Shabbos, and that's it. They bring some cake. You know what I mean? But this is Rabbi Yochanan says, you're going to the Beis HaMikdash, you bring don't see my face empty-handed. You bring your gift, and then if you come other times, there's no limit. You can come. And you don't have to bring anything. That's Rabbi Yochanan. I guess it lets you understand Rabbi Yochanan a little better. Reish Lakish sees it differently, obviously. And he says, no, every time you come, you got to bring a gift to the Beis HaMikdash. This is a opportunity for you. You're in the base, you're going to the Beis HaMikdash. You got to bring something every time you come there. You should be giving, show your connection to Hashem, give from yourself, and bring a sacrifice. So that's
Shlamim. These are all oilas.
Oila. We're talking only about oila. Loisira ponai reikam, bring an oila. Re'iyah. Now, the Gemara says that that the argument between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish is the other days of the holiday. The Shar Yemais Haregel, the other days of the holiday, whenever you come, if you would bring it another on a different day, another sacrifice, an additional burnt offering, according to this way of the Gemara's, at least at this point in the Gemara, even according to Rabbi Yochanan, they'll accept it from you. If you want to bring more, you can do that. But Reish Lakish says you have to do that. Rabbi Yochanan says you don't have to. You can. If you want to, you can. If you bring it, and they'll accept it. And the thing is that they argue if you have to. So Rabbi Yochanan says you come as often as you want, and you don't have to bring anything. Reish Lakish says no, that you come as often as you want, but you will need to bring a sacrifice. So that's the argument. Then the Gemara asks a kasha on Rabbi Yochanan, because we have Reish Lakish holds you have to bring it always. Rabbi Yochanan says, no, you did it once, that's good enough. You brought a sacrifice, now you come as often as you want, you don't have to bring a sacrifice. The question on Rabbi Yochanan is a pasuk. The pasuk says, "Lo yiru panei reikam," do not see my face empty-handed, right? So how do you learn? I mean, you're not allowed to, you're not allowed to come and without a sacrifice. See, it sounds like a very simple verse. How is Rabbi Yochanan gonna learn that verse? So the Gemara answers that Rabbi Yochanan holds that the Gemara answers that Rabbi Yochanan holds that the verse is referring to Iker Haregel. that on the main part of the holiday, that's when you can't see my face empty-handed. But when you come extra times, it's not a problem. Extra times is you get them, you can come and you don't have to worry about bringing a sacrifice. Then the Gemara says that brings a whole brisa over here. Brisa says that don't see my face empty-handed. That refers to slaughtered sacrifices, which means you can't get away with bringing, a Manischewitz bottle of wine. You got to bring a slaughtered sacrifice. It's got to be something decent. You got to bring an animal that's slaughtered. Even a bird sacrifice is not acceptable because a bird is not slaughtered in the temple. In the temple, they didn't do the slaughtering on the birds. They would actually do something called malika, which would be sticking the fingernail into the back of the neck of the bird. So the Gemara here brings a brisa. The brisa says that when it says "Don't see my face empty-handed," it means bring a sacrifice that's slaughtered. Zvachim. Zvachim, it means slaughtered. Zevach. Zevach is another word for slaughtering. So it has to be something slaughtered, and that would refer to an actual carbon, an animal. It can't be a bird, and it can't be a meal offering. Would also not be acceptable. Now the Gemara says, how do we know this? So the Gemara says you learn it because of similar to Chagiga. Just like Chagiga, which is eaten by a human, is eaten by a regular person. It has to be a sacrifice. It has to be an animal because it mentions over there about the chalev, the fats that are brought. And so we basically know that the Chagiga has to be an actual animal that's slaughtered. So the same thing would apply to the Re'iyah, the sacrifice that's for Hashem, also has to be an actual animal that's slaughtered. So that's how we know. Now the Gemara says maybe it's a peace offering and not a burnt offering. And the Gemara says it's logical to say that it's we can logically deduce that it has to be a burnt offering, because just like the Chagiga offering is what's fitting for a human, the burnt offering, the Re'iyah offering, which is the sacrifice that we're calling Re'iyah, that is a sacrifice who it's fit for, which means it's fit for Hashem. And what's fitting for Hashem? A burnt offering. So in other words, you give the people what's fitting for them. You give Hashem what's fitting for him. So the Re'iyah is for Hashem, so it should be fitting, and that would be a oila. And then the Brisa ends off that says, and it also is logically understood this way, because it shouldn't be that your table is full and Hashem's table is, the table of your master is empty. Someone has this noise.
Rabbi.
Yes.
The oil array, can the sacrifice have a mom? I mean, or does it have to be without one? I mean,
how could it have a no? Of course not. Can't have a mom.
I mean, broken. I mean, suppose. I mean, I was just curious whether that's only under certain circumstances. I thought if it's brought daily, would it be the same as if it was brought on a chag? I mean, is there less machmir? It's not as machmir as if it was, if it's brought daily.
It has first of all, it's a slightly different sacrifice than the one brought daily, and second of all sacrifices fall into the category that they're not allowed to have a blemish. All animal sacrifices have certain rules of blemishes that are prohibited, and bird sacrifice have different rules about blemishes. But chisar and aver, if the whole limb is missing. But a animal sacrifice, and they're all in the Torah. They're mentioned in the Torah. They said the different blemishes. that are not acceptable. So yeah, they have the same rules as the regular sacrifices. Yeah, sure.
Thank you.
So the Gemara says that your table should not be full and your master's table empty. Now, what does that sound like? Does it sound like Reish Lakish or Rabbi Yochanan? Rabbi Yochanan said you could come to the Beis Hamikdash and not bring anything. Once you did your mitzvah of Oila, you fulfilled your mitzvah. Reish Lakish says, no, you got to come every time and bring something. Now, this Gemara brought this, our Gemara brought this brisa that says that your table should not be full while your master's table, Hashem's table, is empty. It sounds like you shouldn't come to the Beis Hamikdash empty-handed, because your table is going to be full. You're going to be fulfilling your mitzvahs of having your daily simcha, your daily joy, which is with meat, and Hashem's table is going to be empty. So it would seem like you would not be allowed to go to the Beis Hamikdash while your table is full and Hashem's table is going to be empty. And that seems to be a proof against Rabbi Yochanan. So the Gemara answered that no, that this only applies on the Ikar Haregel, which means that your table should not be full while your master's table is empty. That is referring specifically to the Shalmei Chagiga, to the peace offerings of the holiday, which you basically bring when you basically bring it once. The Shalmei Simcha you have throughout the holiday, but the Shalmei Chagiga is a one-time sacrifice, and it's a peace offering, and that would be the meaning of your table full and your master's table is empty, and that would apply only on the Ikar HaRegel, on the main part of the holiday. So that's the Gemara's answer over there. In other words, the Gemara initially understood that your table will be full and your master's table will be empty should apply to all throughout the days of the holiday. You're going to have this issue because your table full will also have, it also fits in the category of the fact that you have meat called Shalmei Simcha, while everyone else is while Hashem is not, you're not bringing anything for Hashem. So that is the initial understanding of the Brisa, proof against Rabbi Yochanan, and the Gemara's answer that it's really only referring to the Shalmei Chagiga, not the Shalmei Simcha. Just trying to give an understanding of what's the question and what's the answer. So you could learn Gemaras and get a question and an answer, but you don't really understand it deeper. What was really the logic behind their question? What were they thinking? Why did they think it was a good proof? Why did they think that that question was really a strong question? And what really changed in the answer? What's the difference between the way we understood it in the question and how the Gemara understood it in the answer? And basically what changed over here is that the initial thought was that it should apply to Shalmei Simcha, and the answer is no, that it applies to the Shalmei Chagiga. It applies specifically to the Shalmei Chagiga, to the peace offering. That's the holiday peace offering, not the joy peace offering. The joy peace offerings were brought throughout the holidays. Every day or every other day, you could bring it if you ran out of meat, you would bring. And the Chagiga, the holiday offering, was a one-time thing. So the way Rabbi Yochanan keeps understanding it is that when you're fulfilling your obligation, Hashem should also be enjoying. That's basically the understanding, that you're doing your fulfillment of your Chagiga, your holiday obligation. God is also should be enjoying his. But when you do extras, that's a different story. You're doing an extra. You're doing your in other words, you're bringing an extra sacrifice in order to fulfill the simcha. It's not intrinsically an obligation on you to bring the sacrifice. What you really need to do is have the joy. And in order to have the joy, and you ran out of meat, so you can bring a sacrifice. So your sacrifice that you're bringing, called Shalmei Simcha, is not an element in and of itself. It's only a means to have the joy. The other sacrifice is like you're bringing a sacrifice. And then you'll say that my sacrifice is I'm bringing a sacrifice and my master has nothing. If you're just bringing a sacrifice for a means to have the joy, then it's not a problem. But if you're bringing a sacrifice as an obligation, then it becomes problematic that you're bringing that your table is full and your master's table is empty. Now, the Gemara then said that we have another proof against Rabbi Yochanan. And what was the other proof? That there are 3 mitzvahs that the Jewish people had when they went to be Oile Regel. For the 3 holidays. And let me say that again. The Gemara asks a question on Rabbi Yochanan. Reish Lakish basically asked this question to Rabbi Yochanan. And he brings a brisa where Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda says that the 3 holidays of the year, the Yidden are obligated to go to B'Yola Regel, Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot. And when you do this mitzvah, you should not be seen chatzoim, in parts. It's a little vague what that means. The Gemara is going to initially think one way and then change it. But at this point, that's not really what our issue is. Our issue is what it says afterwards. It says, because it says, kol zechurcha, all of your males, which implies that everyone together, there shouldn't be like parts, which we'll soon see. Again, we'll see what that means. And the brisa continues and says, and you should not be seen reikonim, empty. As it says, v'lo yero panai reikam. Don't see my face empty-handed. Now, what would this be emphasizing that we don't know from the simple meaning of the verse? In other words, the brisa is adding something. And it says, it says this verse, and guess what we learn from that verse? Something unique. In other words, we're assuming people know the verses, you know what you're not allowed to do, but there might be something extra. For example, chatzoin. We don't know yet what chatzoin means. You can't come in parts, but somehow we're learning that from the verse. It says kol zechur. Now, that's obviously not the simple meaning of the verse, but somehow from that verse, and we'll soon explain what that means, but somehow from that wording, we're explaining and expounding that there's an extra word, there's an extra meaning in that word, that it shows us something different than we might have understood on a simple level. The same thing is with the next point, that you can't come empty-handed because it says, don't see my face empty-handed. Now, a brisa normally doesn't tell you a pasuk. A brisa doesn't normally say, guess what? You're not allowed to murder. There's not a brisa is not going to tell you you're not allowed to murder. That's a verse in the Torah, you're not allowed to murder. It might tell you that even murdering someone who's sick is also called murder. That might be a brisa. A brisa will tell you that even someone who the doctor said is not going to live more than a day, if the brisa might tell you that even killing such a person is called murder. That would be a brisa. The verse says you're not allowed to murder. A brisa would expound on the verse and give proofs and so on. So here, what is the brisa telling me? You are not allowed to be seen empty-handed because it says, "V'lo yero panai reikam." Don't see my face empty-handed. It seems like that's the simple meaning of the verse. Don't see my face empty-handed. Of course, you can't come empty. So the understanding is that whenever you come, and this is why Reish Lakish thinks he's got to prove that don't come empty-handed is probably telling us that if you're coming extra to the Beis Hamikdash, guess what? even the extra times you come, don't come empty-handed. That's probably the extra, that's what the Bryce is adding. That even, every time you come, don't come empty-handed. So on this, Rabbi Yochanan answers, and he says, no. We're talking about Iker HaRegel, that we're talking specifically about the Iker HaRegel, that when you come for the Iker HaRegel, that then you cannot come empty-handed. Now, what does that mean? So there is an interesting pshat over here. Why would it only apply then? So one of the understandings here is that what the Bryce is really telling us is that if you come empty-handed, you actually have not fulfilled the obligation of going to the Beis Hamikdash, which really brings up a philosophical question, or maybe it's not philosophical, it's a halachic question, I guess we should say. If a person is very poor and they don't have money for a sacrifice, is it better they should come with nothing? Or is it better they shouldn't come? What would be better? On the one hand, you may say, well, asay doicha lois asay, a positive commandment pushes aside a negative commandment. And the mitzvah of coming to the Beis Hamikdash is a positive commandment. And okay, I don't want to come empty-handed, but I have no choice. I have nothing to bring. So let me at least come. At least I'll come. At least I'll come. On the other hand, could be that the mitzvah of coming to the Beis Hamikdash is not a mitzvah if you don't bring something. In other words, it's a mitzvah that has a qualification to it that if you don't do it, you basically did not get the mitzvah at all. You didn't get your mitzvah. If you missed out that such an integral part, then the mitzvah is totally lost. It's like if you have tefillin that doesn't have the parchment inside. Should you put it on? No, there's nothing to put on. There's no parchment. The integral part of the mitzvah of tefillin is that it has the shemaim and it has the other portions. If you don't have it, that you didn't do no mitzvah. There's no reason to put it on. Person is stuck somewhere and all they have is a pair of tefillin that's missing the parchments. Then definitely daven, definitely beg Hashem for a miracle to happen, that you'll get a pair of tefillin, or definitely download that app that you can get tefillin wherever you live, wherever you are, wherever you find yourself. There's some app that people have. It's a tefillin app. If you need a pair of tefillin, someone nearby will hopefully find you and on the app. But if you don't have a kosher pair of tefillin, there's no reason to put on a tefillin that's totally 100% not kosher, that doesn't have the parchment. So the same thing would be here. And this is one way of understanding this Gemara, that Rabbi Yochanan says, don't show your face empty, because if you do, you didn't fulfill the mitzvah of going to the Beis Hamikdash, because it says in that concept that the mitzvah is dependent. The mitzvah of going to the Beis Hamikdash is dependent on bringing a sacrifice. That only applies on the first day of the holiday, according to Rabbi Yochanan. According to Rabbi Yochanan, that would apply, that you have to come, and part of that coming, you only have to come once. Now, of course, if you want to come more, according to this view, you could, but according to this, with the Gemara's understanding, now you could, but you have to come once, and that one time that you come, you're only fulfilling the mitzvah of coming if you bring the sacrifice with you. And if you don't bring the sacrifice with you, then better don't come, because you're basically not fulfilling a mitzvah of coming, and you end up only sinning by not bringing the sacrifice. Now, the Gemara then asks, the opposite way. And it asks a question on Rish Lakish. And it brings an interesting source that we used this either once or twice. We spoke about it. We spoke about it regarding the opinion that says that a person who's blind in one eye is exempt from going to the Beis Hamikdash. Yira and Yeraya. The source was the same Kashem Shabbat Lirois Kachba Lerois. Two different ways of reading it, but basically that just like Hashem comes to see you without bringing you a sacrifice, you also come to see Hashem without bringing a sacrifice. Now, when is that? Of course, we have a verse that says you have to come bring a sacrifice. So how do you reconcile this exposition of the verse of the teaching of Yira Yeraya? The verse says one thing and it's read one way and it's written a different way, and so the Gemara deduces this concept. The Gemara expounds on this idea that there has to be a similarity the way Hashem comes to you and you come to Hashem, and Hashem is not bringing a sacrifice to you. You also should not bring a sacrifice to Hashem. On the other hand, we do have a verse that says, don't see my face empty-handed. So the answer to reconcile this is that sometimes you can come empty-handed and sometimes you can't come empty-handed. When is that? Whenever you come extra, you don't have to bring a sacrifice. But when you come the first time, you must bring a sacrifice. When you come the obligation, you got to bring a sacrifice. Other times, you could come empty-handed. Now, this proves Reish Lakish. Reish Lakish says every time you come, you got to bring a sacrifice. What do you mean? We have a source. The source is that you don't have to bring a sacrifice every time. So the Gemara now switches over and says, you know what? We got to change our understanding of this debate, Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. So now we're switching gears. We're going back and saying, let's change the way we initially understood this. I know some people don't like Gemara because of this. All of a sudden we got to change our whole way of thinking. Now we got to switch all the way, new understanding. What's the new understanding? That Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish are arguing about they're arguing slightly in different rule, different laws. What are they saying? If you come to the Beis Hamikdash and you don't bring a sacrifice on the extra days of the holiday, in other words, you did your sacrifice on the first day, and now you came on later on and you're bringing a sacrifice, or you're coming without a sacrifice, everyone agrees that you're fine. You don't have to bring a sacrifice. Because we have this source that Rabbi Yochanan just brought. Seems like a very solid source, that there has to be an opportunity for you to come for free, that you don't have to pay. There has to be such an option. And so we figured it out. There is such an option, or even according to Reish Lakish, he has to agree with this. This is a brisa. This is a Tanoic source. It's that there has to be such an option. So according to Reish Lakish, also you could come without bringing a sacrifice. So what do they argue about? They argue that in a case where he came and he brought a sacrifice, do we accept it? Rabbi Yochanan says that you could come as often as you want. There's no limit. But that's only coming. The sacrifice does actually have a limit. What is the limit to the sacrifice? There's a maximum. You can only bring that sacrifice once. Oilas re'iyah. There's a maximum how many times you can bring that sacrifice. If you bring it more than once, we will not accept it from you. Why? It's called Bal Toisef. You're not allowed to add to the mitzvahs. You can't do more. Now, if you brought an extra sacrifice, Rabbi Yochanan says we will not allow it. Reish Lakish says you would be allowed to bring an extra sacrifice, and it's not a problem. We will accept it from you. It's not a problem of Baal Tosef. You're not transgressing the prohibition of Baal Tosef, of adding on to the mitzvahs. According to Reish Lakish, it is kosher, and they will accept it from you. So that's the argument of, at least on a very simple level. Tosef over here says that it's specifically talking about the first day of the holiday. It's a little complicated to go into that. Why specifically it's on the first day? There's it gets a little deep, but the on a very simple level, the argument between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish is about bringing extra sacrifices that are called oilas re'iyas. Would you be allowed to, or is it called Baal Tosef? And that's the way the Gemara understands it, which comes out from here that would you be obligated to bring more burnt offerings every time you come to the courtyard? No. What is the meaning of the brisa of the Mishnah in Peah when it says there's no measure for ra'ayoin? What is the meaning of that? So, number one, it means that you could come as often as you want. Ra'ayin, come and see the Beis Hamikdash, see Hashem as often as you want. Number two, there is Reish Lakish's view that you could bring as many Ra'ayin sacrifices as you want, Oilas Re'iyas as you want. But Rabbi Yochanan wouldn't learn it that way. In other words, Rabbi Yochanan wouldn't agree with that. Rabbi Lakish will say, yeah, it could also mean the sacrifice. Rabbi Yochanan would say, no, you can only bring one. You can't bring more than one. Oilas Re'iyah can only be one. And you can't bring extras. So there you would not have the meaning. According to Rabbi Yochanan, you can't translate it to mean the sacrifice. It has to mean the going up to the Beis Hamikdash. Reish Lakish could say it means both. It means going to the Beis Hamikdash and bringing the sacrifice. Okay. So now we're up to the next Gemara, and the Gemara is on page 7a. It's about 11 lines up from the bottom of the page, maybe 9 lines up from the bottom of the page. Esvei, 9 lines up from the bottom of the page. Esvei, Rabbi Yochanan asked a question to Reish Lakish. Haikar raglacha mi beis reyecha. It says in Proverbs, don't go to your friend's house too much. Don't hang out there too much. Haikar raglacha. Make it precious by not going too much. Don't have your feet go too much. Haikar raglacha. Mi beis reyecha, from the house of your friend, pen yisba'acha, lest you satisfy him, usnei'echa, and you cause him to hate you. In other words, if you hang out too much there, he's going to end up not liking you. Don't hang out there too much. And the Gemara says that this pasuk or at least the understanding is, that maybe you should not be going, that it's referring to Hashem's house, and we are called Hashem's Reyecha, friends. The Laman Achai V'Reyoi, right? We were called the Reyim, Hashem and the Jewish people were called friends. And so it says that don't become too often, don't come too often and to the house of your Reyecha, your friend, which would sound like you shouldn't be going and so often to the and bringing sacrifices. It's interesting that it's not an issue going, it's more sacrifices. In other words, he's asking this question on Reish Lakish. Reish Lakish is the one who says you can bring as many sacrifices as you want. Rabbi Yochanan is saying, you see from this verse that you shouldn't bring so many sacrifices. You could ask that maybe it also means you shouldn't come. But at least on a simple level, this is the Gemara's question. And the Gemara answers, Hasam b'chatois v'ashamos, that it's not a problem that Reish Lakish holds that you could come as often as you want and bring sacrifices, which would be the burnt offerings. Because the verse that says don't hang out too much in the house of your friend is referring to chatois v'ashamos, that don't bring too many sin offerings and guilt offerings, meaning don't sin too much. Don't be familiar with sinning too often that you'll end up needing to bring so many sin offerings, these type of offerings. Rather, make sure, be careful not to sin. And the Gemara says, Kidder Reb Levi, like Reb Levi says, Reb Levi Rami, because Reb Levi said there seems to be a contradiction. It says, Hoike Ragelcha mi beis reyecha, which means that you should, which is this verse we just mentioned, that it should be precious, and therefore minimize your feet from going to the house of your friend. And it says also, Uksiv, Uv avoy beischa ba'olos, I will go to your house with burnt offerings, implying like this is a very positive thing. So are we supposed to bring extra sacrifices or not? So the Gemara answers like Reb Levi answers, like Kasha, it's not a contradiction. Kan b'chatois v'ashamos, kan ba'olos u'shlamim. That there's a difference between sin offerings and guilt offerings and burnt offerings and peace offerings. Burnt offering and peace offerings, these are great pleasure for Hashem. Nachas ruach to Hashem, it gives Hashem great pleasure. It's a great smell for Hashem. Reyach nichayach, right? It's a pleasant smell to Hashem. But the burnt offering, but the guilt offerings and sin offerings, that's of course painful to Hashem. That's what it says. Don't go too often bringing those type of sacrifices, meaning don't sin too often. Tanya nami hachi. We also have a brisa this way, where it says not to go too often refers to b'chatois v'ashamos hakosav medaber. The verse is specifically talking about sin offerings and guilt offerings, that you shouldn't need to go that often. Ata omer b'chatois v'ashamos, you say it refers to sin offerings and guilt offerings. Maybe it only refers to all types of offerings, like burnt offerings and peace offerings. Maybe even those you shouldn't bring too often. When it says, I will go to your house with burnt offerings, I will pay to you my pledge. This says that you should bring burnt offerings and peace offerings. So what am I going to do to fulfill the other verse, that I shouldn't go too often with sacrifices. That's that's talking about the burnt offer, the sin offerings and guilt offerings. Now, the question really is, most of the chatois sin offerings have to do with a mistake. So what does it mean, don't come too often with mistakes? If it was talking about something, how do you control yourself? You control yourself from something that you do intentionally. But what does it mean, don't come too often with sin offerings? I would say don't sin intentionally. But to tell you, no, don't come too often with sin offerings. Sin offerings are basically all mistakes. It's you made a mistake. So what does it mean you shouldn't come to sin offerings? Is anyone awake? Yes, Robert.
I'm trying to figure out whether a sin offering is a mistake or something that's unintentional versus being a guilt offering. I mean, I think there's a subtle difference between the two of them.
Okay, so you got a good point. So basically the sin offerings that we're talking about, you're sort of right that there is a little there's a little guilt there, in a sense that you should have been more careful. That you did something that you weren't sure was wrong, but there's potential that it's wrong. And because of that, you shouldn't have rushed to do it. You should have really checked it out better before. Because you didn't check it out better, therefore, you sin. So there's there is now guilt offerings is another category that encompasses a number of different cases, scenarios. And one of the scenarios of a guilt offering is called an asham talui, which really is similar to a sin offering, where you really don't know. We call it a guilt offering, but it's a talui. You don't even know if you're obligated in a sin offering because you're really not sure. It's an asham talui, and you have to bring such a guilt offering for that. Now that guilt offering could also fall into this category where maybe you should have checked it out a little more before you came into sin, meaning that even unintentional things, we have to be careful to try not to transgress, because it comes from our rush sometimes to do things, and we don't give ourselves enough time to calculate, is this really kosher? Is it really appropriate? Is this does this look like the piece of food that I put in the refrigerator before, or was it put in from someone else? Is this is this definitely okay what I'm doing? So there is a concept here, and that's what we see here, this idea of being careful even for these sin offerings and guilt offerings. Okay, well, my time is up. Have a wonderful day. Sei gesund.
Thank you, Rabbi.
See you later. Okay.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Yes.